Um, Welcoming everybody to the session of the Physical Samples Interest Group of RDA, which is now, I actually don't know exactly in which year, but it's been quite a while. I figure we can soon celebrate 10 years, or we have already, I'm not sure. Um, the, whoop, what happened?
Can you go back one, Esther, please? Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
because if there are there any new RDA members on the call? I Oh, somebody who is it? Joyce from Graboni. That's very cool. Thank you for joining. Exciting. So, this is just for those who are new to RDA to emphasize the guiding principles for the RDA community to be open, consensus driven, and community driven. And it's all focusing on harmonization and inclusivity. And I think this will come out today as well that this group really aims to harmonize across many different disciplines and providers. And we are nonprofit and technology neutral. Okay, next slide. So here's just an overview of the agenda. We're gonna focus on accessible domain metadata sample schemas today as the foundation of the universe of samples on the internet or the web. We have the first 15 minutes focusing on catalogs and case studies. The second set of presentations is focusing on the development of domain-specific metadata schemas. And then we have a third session, or it's the agenda item 4 here, as a community forum on building bridges between the mandatory dataset metadata elements and the domain profiles. And then we're going to try to identify our main 3 key takeaways and briefly brainstorm about next steps for the interest group, possible working groups, and then maybe even plans for the next plenary. Okay, next one. I think this is when Leslie takes over.
Okay, thanks. So I did I put it in? Okay, I'm going to talk about our catalogue that the Physical Samples Interest Group has been running now for a couple of years. And please feel free to suggest to improve it because it's a bit messy. But anyway, we won't share the screen. Just thought you could click on it and go in there. Next slide, please, Esther. Okay, we started this catalogue, as I said, around 2023. And what we were originally doing was just listing projects that were working on samples and identifiers and trying to see how many there were. So if you join this group and you're in samples and got a samples project, please feel free to add it. It's the second worksheet, the second tab, which is kind of the semantic resources, vocabularies, ontologies. And this has just been growing organically. I'm interested to see if we get any more new ones added in this session. In that we've now got, I think, 56 entries. And if you go to the next slide, please.
Ah,
So ask the question. Thanks, Kirsten. I pinched your slide. Um, ask the
that's a slide
question,
I have too.
why are we doing it? And I'd like to say that I'm part of the IGSN EV, which is the organizational group that handles the IGSN identifier. Our back end is now with DOI. when we merged, the initial focus was on the left to the registration metadata, which is pretty well our registration metadata is the minimum metadata profile for getting a DOI with DataSite. And we felt that wasn't enough, and there was no consistency in what we were doing, and that we needed to work out what a descriptive metadata profile might look like, accepting that also there are domain specific, but could we set up a descriptive metadata profile that did apply to multiple domains? And so the IGS NEV have set up this metadata working group, and usual thing, typical, before we get started, I said, look, why don't we see what somebody else has got? So I designed that spreadsheet. I think we put it out about a year ago at an RDA plenary, and we're just overwhelmed by the numbers that are there. And now, in a way, we're kind of saying, well, what do we do with this? Because if there's so many, we probably need to start getting proper metadata on them and move it to a registry, but which one? And then we're also thinking, well, could we use AI to help us try and come at what are the terms that are similar to the domains? So go to the next slide, please. Um, what I've been looking at it more recently, and many of those resources listed in our catalogue that go beyond, have metadata elements that go beyond the actual sample description itself. Can't remember which one, but one of them has about 14 tables that are describing things specific to that domain. But again, those common elements of the spatial referencing, the sample description, etc., comes out. And so the first thing we thought we should consider is that most of those vocabularies that are listed, they've all got links. They are all used by sample repositories that are publicly available. And if we want these to comply with the FAIR principles, we need these to publish these vocabularies in a way, regardless of the shape they're in, because in effect, they're giving you a means of machine readability of their catalogues. And Principle I2, the vocabulary is used to describe the data, and the metadata must themselves be fair. So I'm just arguing we need somehow to say, well, what's these are domain specific profiles. And again, as you go in, and I think Penny's going to go on to this with soils, there's quite a few around, what's what we call in Australia, the Ridgy Didge one, or I think you call it the authentic one. But can we actually start trawling through some of these metadata schemas using something like, say, iAdopt, or this on the right-hand side, I know you can't read it, but the OGC abstract specification. And so we can start to group the metadata elements, if not the metadata tables, around some of these frameworks. Next. Okay, so that was all I wanted to do, introduce you to that sheet, and please keep adding to it, because we are getting to the stage we're going to have to do something with it. But like I say, it was quite a surprise to us just how many metadata schemas. There are a couple of ontologies, vocabularies that are out there. And as I said, I think as a first step, if they are describing known resources, they have to be published somewhere. But secondly, how can we work towards some like agreed domain specific repositories? Domain specific profiles. And that's why in the next section, we've got Thomas or Jens talking about what archaeology did, Kirsten on geology, and Penny's going to present how the soils community are attacking it. Just as to showcase methods of people that are trying to work on getting better at developing a domain. specific profile for their samples. And now I'll hand over to Catherine, who's working with the uh, sample metadata working group, and that's a bit more specific than what we're covering. So let's pass on to Catherine now.
Hi. Um, so I'm working with the sample type classification working group, which was set up, launched at IDW back in October. So we're about 5 or 6 months in so far. For anyone unfamiliar, a working group usually has a lifetime of about 18 months. Um, this is quite a short time scale for the scale of what we're trying to do. Next, please, Esther. So our group is set up to try and come up with a very high level of sample classification. We are trying to help guide the metadata, or what metadata terms you might use, for example, by assigning types to samples that would then lead you towards standards, vocabularies, things that already exist. We're not trying to replace these, we're trying to connect them all up to an umbrella classification. So it's not going to go very deep at all, but in principle, it should cover everything, which is obviously a very big scope. Next, please. So we are collecting case studies, and I'm now going to give you some idea of what we've collected so far. So we've had a number of responses from several different areas, a number of different domains, but as you look down them, you'll see that there are several that are earth sciences and environment. There's some material sciences of different types in there. And it will be helpful to get some more. I will share a link for that at the end. Next, please. From that, we are beginning to get an idea of what sort of samples people are testing, discovering, making. And as you might expect, these are diverse, which we did expect them to be, but it's useful to know what is actually happening out there. Next, please. What's probably more significant for us is how people categorize, classify their samples. How do they describe their samples? So we've found there are a number of properties that are mentioned in all or nearly all of the responses that we've had. Not always using the same language, but as you look at the descriptions, they clearly overlap. Um, a lot of people mentioned a physical state. Is this a solid or liquid? If it is a solid, is it a powder, a crystal, a found object? And where was it found? How has it been processed up until this point? So these are quite common, which is helpful to know what metadata can be collected for samples, not very helpful for distinguishing them potentially. If everyone is answering roughly the same questions. Potentially they are, maybe we break it down by physical state, but if everyone's answering, if you just say we're going to look at is there a physical state, then that's less helpful. Some properties are definitely not universal, but they are common to multiple domains. And as we're looking at a very high level, broad classification, this may help us to bring some domains together into the same area. And then there are the domain specific properties. So things that are only mentioned so far in one area and clearly relate strongly to what's happening there and don't have an obvious analog elsewhere. So obviously I've given some examples there, but there are many, many more that have been provided. Next, please. We asked about vocabularies and standards. So what we have seen is that some of the domains have a lot of terminologies, vocabularies. They're very well organized in this respect, and a lot of properties have controlled vocabularies associated with them. Some areas I've started to do this, but it's very limited. And in others, nothing was provided, or specifically people wrote that there were no vocabularies or standards that they were routinely using. This may mean that these don't exist. This is an expanding area. It is entirely possible that within the domain, within the community, these things are being developed, but they have not been widely adopted yet, so they are not in common use. We did find that there is not a lot of crossover between even very closely related fields, that we're not having the same vocabularies being mentioned multiple times. They do seem to be very specific to their field. Next, please. We've asked about what persistent identifiers are being used, and most people say they're not using any. Now, we did have a session yesterday where there was a bigger discussion about this. And I think this is partly people are using certain persistent identifiers, but they're not how they're describing the sample specifically. So not everyone has included everything. Next, please. The ones that did have identifiers, these were the only ones that were mentioned. So IGSN for samples, and then ORCID for people, RAW for institutes. As I said, I think a lot of people are actually using ORCID, but they didn't feel that that was part of the sample as such, so they didn't necessarily mention it in their responses. However, even for something like IGSN, something to identify a sample, or something within a community to identify the samples, there isn't actually anything being used, or at least not that anyone's telling us about. Anyway, next, please. We can absolutely use more case studies throughout the life of this working group. We all still need information coming in as much as possible to help guide where we're going, and hopefully as we make progress to test and verify what we're doing and make sure that anything new that comes in still fits within the model. So if you can help us, or if you know anyone who can help us, anyone who measures anything, any object, any information that you or they can provide us would be helpful. And we've got the information here, and obviously these slides will be available afterwards, so you can come back and find this page as needed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Catherine, before we go in, has anyone got any questions of Catherine? Joyce has put in the chat, are there any common identifiers which can link databases across the board from geology, archaeology to soils and that? Jens, would you like to answer that?
In terms of identifiers, it's in the sense of identifiers for the vocabulary terms or for the objects?
Mostly for the objects. From basically when you are in a same area and you are actually looking at archaeology, looking at geology, looking at the soils of that area. How are you going to identify that all these are coming from the same area? And then if you have similar, maybe soil, which is soil group, which is maybe like another soil group, maybe in France, UK, do you have certain identifiers which can actually sort of show the similarities? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the clarification. In terms of identifying these sample objects, the International Generic Sample Number, the IGSN, exists. It needs broader adoption to really make those connections. Having a place where you can search across domains, I think that is really a challenge, that cross-domain searches are still generally quite difficult. The domain repositories are domain repositories, and the very general ones often don't have the right discovery information. So if potentially the dataset metadata would have location, if that's recorded with the sample registration, and could be used, but it's not a common use case yet. So, but your question is a very good one. How would we enable these kind of cross-domain searches?
I think as well, whilst when we're collecting these case studies, we are asking people about the domain they're working in. The vocabulary that we hope to end up with may not be split along domain lines. If there are things in common with samples from different domains, they may well fall under the same type, the same category from our point of view. We're not far enough along yet to say that definitively, but we're not restricting to having to split along domain lines, because if we were going to do that, we could simply ask people just what is their domain at the beginning, and that's not necessarily the most helpful way to split this vast group of samples.
Catherine,
Kirsten?
I was wondering, Catherine, if you're familiar with the work that has come out of the Internet of Samples, of iSamples, because that
I am
has
aware of it. I'm not, I haven't looked into it in too much detail myself.
because
Yeah.
that did a lot of these investigations and, has basically harmonized and integrated metadata from different domains, including archaeology, including biology, genomics, and earth sciences. And we've done surveys on what people want to search for and build search interfaces for that. So maybe it's worth in exchanging some more information about that. We are at the end of the iSamples project and still working on the final publication about it.
Okay. Great.
just
Thank you. I'll
one
make sure to. Yeah,
just
sorry.
one note about that. So we had Steve Richard reporting on iSample in the BOF that lead to the foundation of that group.
Yep.
So we are definitely aware of that iSamples exist.
Catherine, I was just wondering if you're coming across vocabularies, are you able to add them to our list?
Yes, I will certainly have a look and see how what we've been given compares to your list. I will see what I can do there.
Because we might as well try and pull them all out.
Absolutely. If it's been collected somewhere and we've got it, I'll
Yeah.
have a look at that in the next week or so.
Because see, the difference is we're a interest group and you are a working group, so we can keep going on for a longer time. And so
Yeah.
certainly in another group, I've had a catalogue going for about 10 years and people just keep adding to it. So that catalogue will have persistence whilst the interest group continues. Okay, well, I think we better move on. We're going to look at three groups doing domain metadata schemas, and first one is archaeology with is it going to be Jens or Thomas?
I don't want to put Thomas on the spot. I don't think he
Okay.
knew that he might be speaking here, but he can jump in at any time because those were originally his slides that he produced for another presentation. I reshuffled them. Don't want to force him into doing PowerPoint karaoke. So let's go to the next slide then. I'll briefly talk about the work of the IGSN Dataset Archaeology Community of Practice. This was a group that started operating out of the strategic partnership between the International Generic Sample Number Organization and DataCite. And the community has had meetings since March 2022 as a pilot community of practice for us to work out how we can bring a community of practitioners together to develop a metadata schema and then see how this can be implemented in the DataCite technological framework. So this has been a collaboration between IGSN and DataCite. The people on the group were overwhelmingly archaeologists, but with various backgrounds in archaeometry, landscape archaeology, and also a strong data management background. The interest was in the material sample management, the data collection, and the publication. Back then, we had 11 people who participated regularly. Next slide, please. So we ran this community of practice really as a grassroots exercise to find out how do archaeologists work and how could their work be supported by persistent identifiers. And so the goal was to promote this use of persistent identifiers for archaeological samples, articulate the use cases and the workflows within that are used by those disciplines and subdisciplines, and determine how to describe a sample. What would be the minimum and some extensions to a metadata profile that would be needed to support those use cases. The challenges in archaeology were that it's a diverse discipline and it's diverse in its use cases and in its practices, which I think is not unusual. It describes artifacts, assemblages, and locations. So that it's also a variety of different ways of looking at things. And it's very important to record the provenance of an object and access to the sites and the objects. Next slide, please. So the outputs from the community of practice were the promotion of the work through newsletters in the discipline, webinars, conferences, to broaden the membership of the community in the community of practice. And we also conducted a survey in the community in late 2023, early 2024 to find out, do practitioners in this field know about how to use persistent identifiers and that they exist? If yes, what were their experiences with using persistent identifiers and the use cases? And the interest in actually using this. I think really main outputs in the end were the archaeological sample metadata profile and a crosswalk recommendation of how to map this profile onto the DataCite metadata schema. Next slide, please. So the way we developed this crosswalk and the metadata profile was to describe examples for a specific use case, and then look at how this is treated in already existing metadata schemas like the Archaeological Data Service, metadata and data structure, that comparing the identified needs, requirements with already existing structures led to formulating the first prototype metadata profile. We discussed this further to see whether this meets the needs of the broader discipline, which led to the publication or the formulation of the version 1 profile that was then tested with real-world examples and refined according to existing schemas and vocabularies in the field, which led to version 2 of the profile. And then from that, we developed the crosswalk and added further refinements, which eventually led to the publication of the metadata profile version 3.2. Next slide, please. So what was characteristic about this work was to build this consistency with previous work in the geoscience community that has developed the IGSN work, but also with the existing practices in the archaeology community, and then the compatibility with the DataCite technology stack. Next slide, please. So we published the sample metadata profile and the crosswalk on Zenodo, and the links are here on the slide, but they will also be in the session notes. Thomas, did I forget anything? Do you want to add something?
No, you did a very good job. I can just add that yesterday I was notified that the article about the IGSN and the implementation at the German Mining Museum was published in Internet Archaeology. I put a link in the chat if anybody wants to read it. It's a follow-up part of the proceedings from the EAC conference last year.
Great, thanks. Yep, that's all on the archaeology community of practice.
Okay. Any questions from the audience on archaeology?
I have a question both to Thomas and Jens in some way. I mean, what's your strategy now to bring in more of the archaeology community? I mean, iSamples had archaeology as one of the use cases, and obviously that's not fully aligned with what you did now. And, how do we go from here and converge further or figure out, what different parts of the archaeology community that are not aligned yet can do to converge more?
I can suggest I moved to the US recently for jobs, so we have now someone from the interest group or from the community of practice who is in the US as well. So it makes things easier to promote it on the Americas, thinking about SAA conferences and so on. If I remember correctly, your representative from archaeology was Eric from Open Context in the
Eric
IC.
Kanza,
Yeah, Eric
yeah.
Henry.
Yeah.
So I know him as well from a previous project, and we could check out how to align those profiles or how to
Yeah,
align
that would be
IC.
great. I mean, Eric and Sarah Kanza were both part of iSample, so
Yeah.
trying to bring people together.
Yeah. But at the moment, with Rory leaving DataCite at the end of the year or a bit earlier, there was a kind of a break in the activities of the community of
Oh,
practice.
I
He's
see.
still in the process of getting the great job he was doing in pushing us all forward, coordinating all the efforts and distributing it among the members of the community of practice.
Cool.
But we're regrouping now to
Yeah.
restart.
Yeah.
And maybe we should also, I mean, I know that there are two archaeological institutes, one German, one Austrian, as CISA users, and trying to understand how we can potentially maybe translate metadata that are already in CISA to new vocabularies and so on, mapping that. I think that would be an interesting exercise.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, look, we better move on. Kirsten's now going to talk about some activities in the geological community.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, did you? Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
I think this is still my screen. Did we manage to
I
get the
can
slides
I
in?
can see Kirsten's. If you look on the top, it's got meeting, Esther's screen, Kirsten's screen. So if we can all switch to Kirsten's screen.
So yeah, whoops. Now something happened.
You're on slide 3.
now I'm on 2, right?
Yeah.
So you've seen this diagram already. Leslie had it in her presentation, and I just wanted to emphasize that this was a step towards convergence across different institutions, organizations, and so on who managed Earth samples, catalogs, and metadata at the time. So this is quite a long time ago when the IGSN was still the International Geosample Number. And it showed to me, the approach of convergence that we're now talking about as well, and having these core metadata, which we call the CISA discovery metadata at this point, and that we tried to align with existing standards such as the observations and management schema, and then allow what we called the agent catalog at the time to add metadata that are relevant for their specific applications, for their sample types, and so on. So when Leslie asked me to talk about a sample metadata profile, I have to say there is no standard geoscience sample metadata profile, in my view, at least. And it is in part due to the fact that there can't really be one metadata profile because we have a lot of different sample types that need different components in the metadata, but that could mostly sit in the extensions. But what is happening still is that stakeholders who operate sample metadata catalogs, who oversee communities that are sampling the IGSN allocating agents and so on, largely develop their own metadata profiles and vocabularies in isolation, unfortunately, still. So we have a lot of different data systems that need to be aligned, obviously. One new stakeholder in this game, I think, is that there have been very long-term and stable biocollection data systems that are now expanding into geoscience collections, such as Geospecify or this new extension for geosciences of the Taxonomic Data Working Group of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And I think that's something to follow when we're talking about geoscience sample metadata profiles, and to reach out to and kind of try to collaborate. In general, though, I think that the core, the basic attributes that we want for samples is fairly stable and has a large overlap with all the other profiles that we already saw and talked about. So I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about CSAR as, one of the big catalogs. CISA is currently at about 5.82 million samples that have been registered over more than 20 years now. And these samples are not only geoscience, they ocean science, they environmental samples, and so on. And they come from huge range of users, be it individual researchers all the way to national museums that have contributed, and from all continents. And so we have actually aggregated, obviously, metadata for many different sample types and use scenarios. And again, it has worked well for the core, but CISA still needs more flexibility for the more specific metadata for different sample types. And I can actually skip this over. That's not that relevant, but I think we have started now to actually look at what has come in over those 20 years. and how have people filled out the templates or schemas that we have provided for sample registration, because I think it's really important to recognize also how far our users, our organizations willing to go in the detail that they provide to registries and sample catalogs. So for us, we only had very few mandatory metadata because of the diversity of sample types. So we couldn't enforce a lot of metadata that specific groups could not provide. Nevertheless, it shows now in this analysis that geospatial coordinates have been provided by about 80% of all users, and they're, among those leftover 20% are legacy collections that didn't have any coordinates and so on. So we're still analyzing this. And we know that about 90% of all registrations have at least a top level classification, which is now we call material. Is it biological? Is it a rock? Is it a mineral? Is it water or soil and so on? So we have just in the last couple of weeks made the decision that the geospatial coordinates and the top level classification will become mandatory metadata as well when people register, even though it still creates problems with synthetic samples that do not have locations. But I think it's really worth diving deeper into an analysis of these provided metadatas. So we have been working on an overhaul of CISA, and that had to do with the developments of iSamples, which provides that schema that is more flexible and allows extensions for different communities. So we now have adopted the Earth Sciences extension of iSamples. And we went into our existing content and have been cleaning it up, creating more meaningful, hierarchical, and precise vocabularies. We have specifically paid attention to better link with related identifiers in the schema. I think that's really critical. I mean, one of the big cleanups has been organizations where we've added RORs now to the records where it was possible. All the other things I think are not relevant for the metadata, but we're trying to further automate at least the validation of metadata and making suggestions to users who submit. But what has driven some of our work on the sample metadata schema is interoperability that we have wanted to establish with other systems. So our colleague Steve Richard, who is a consultant for CISA, has been working with Natalie Raya and Andrea Thomer on completing a schema.org representation of sample metadata and integrating that or aligning it with CDEF requirements. We also had to make changes to vocabularies and schemas in order to establish the interoperability with the StraboSpot field app that allows people now to generate or to register samples and get IGSNs while they're in the field. And the other big effort has been to integrate a huge catalog of marine and lacustrine geological samples that NOAA used to run into our database. So these are sort of real-world tests of how well our schema works and where we need to make adjustments. I think that's what I had. Yeah, let me just...
Okay. Does anyone have any questions of Kirsten whilst Esther, we switch back to you doing the screen sharing? Okay, Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, obviously I was, very interested to see that you have sample type as an attribute. Is that a controlled vocabulary?
The two vocabularies that are basically finished is the sample type or object type. I like to call it object type because we do have objects that are not really
Mm.
samples. We have registered stations and holds, and we're now, as we're extending CSAR into extraterrestrial samples, we need to have faults for meteorites and so on. So it's the higher level aggregation of samples. I think the other vocabulary is the classifications
Yeah,
with
the
rock
top level
types, mineral
classification that you named.
types.
And obviously we are very interested in that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I was thinking when Catherine was reporting, we should have a more in-depth discussion in how, our
I mean, what you could do, as Catherine mentioned, we are in this use case collection activity. And
yeah.
if uh, would it be possible to say submit a CSAR use case? So the collection goes, we have some template document
Hmm.
as an orientation for submitting use cases, but don't feel too strictly, say, bound to that template. Just feel free to put in what makes sense for you. And that would be very useful if you could describe what your sample types are and your top level classification.
Sure.
I would like
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Okay.
I would like
Who's
to just put on a comment. Can I put on a comment?
yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kirsten, for such a elaborate explanation. I was looking at your diagram there. It shows that you have included many things which are actually essential, like time, position on latitude and altitude, countries, and so forth and so on. I'll commend you again because you have just taken a mammoth task because geoscience is just a lot of varieties. But also, I can suggest that what is important also, you can, apart from who has who has collected the samples, how was it collected? Was the person on the ground? Was it in the air atmosphere? Or is it from a satellite? And also, when you want to inform people about, the viability of data, uh, how was it classified? Was it classified by computer? And in this day and age, you can also add on if the
Yeah.
classification was by AI. Just a small comment, but you have done a very good work. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that comment. I think this is really, really great suggestions I mean, we have sampling methods, but I think we need to be broader also with respect to including care principles in, how things were collected. Did they have permits and so on that we can add to it.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, I keep saying that a lot. We'll now hand over to Fanny to talk about how the global soils community is starting to come together to develop a metadata profile. So, Fanny, could you take over, please?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for the invitation and happy to be here. I was actually also quite inspired by the previous talk about CSAR by Kirsten, so I'm looking forward to follow up and see if we can maybe make some links between what you just presented and also what will be here on these slides. I thought to maybe give a little bit of an overview or a first impression of how scattered the soil data landscape is. So it's not only about metadata, vocabs are of course a crucial part, and we're also working on data models and everything in between. And at the moment, it's both on an international level. So within the International Union of Soil Sciences, there is some attention to it, not too much, but we'd like to increase that. Then there's actually a big push in Europe on soil research. So it's a mission, they call it, Mission Soil, where there's, for a change, also some specific projects on soil data. So SoilWise is one, which is supposed to build a knowledge. Well, we actually have built a knowledge and data catalog where metadata, of course, are completely crucial. And that's actually the big bottleneck for the catalog at the moment. And Soil Harmony is going to start soon, which is about developing transfer functions for soils, both for field and for lab. So when you have the same property measured with different methods, can you calculate a formula to go from one to the other, and how to do that in a good way, which also means we're going to store a lot of data, which needs to be annotated, which needs to be well described also in the data and the metadata models. And a lot of those projects, they work together in a cluster. So it's a nice platform to promote a couple of things. So I'm also really listening intently and seeing what can we learn? Can we push that also to the European projects, and how can we go about it? Then also there's at the global level, there's quite a bit going on in INSI, of the Global Soil Partnership, so the International Network of Soil Information Institutes. So it's a lot of institutes that all have the same aims to make data accessible, and obviously that includes metadata. There's a group in US, on soil ontology, not so much on metadata, but vocabs do factor in. Of course, there's the general organization. So RDA is here, CODATA, OGC, ISO. There's a couple of international institutes like the CGs, like ISRIC, like a lot of others that also really try to work on fair soil data. And every country is doing their own thing as well. So, and that's not necessarily always very coordinated. And there's some really good examples, like from Australia. And there's a really big variety in inequality. And recently there's been a bit of a push on soil legislation. And we do see that also affects better harmonization of soil vocabularies. It will need to also mean something for metadata. So hopefully that also gives a bit of a push, but it is quite scattered and all of these groups somehow need to work together. At the moment, that's really more incidental. So people that join multiple organizations or multiple groups that happen to work together, and that's about the coordination that it gets. Next slide, please. So I thought to give a little bit of an impression of some ongoing things in soils on metadata. We mostly, well, there's a couple of core standards that are being followed. So quite some people use the ISO. DCAT is used, Data Society is used, Dublin Core is used. So it's all used in parallel, and they basically just pick one that serves their objects best. And then sometimes they go and extend on that, sometimes they don't. And they just push in a couple of more keywords and that's it. But it's the starting point really are those metadata standards. We also have developed some tooling to translate those to each other to make it easier to whichever core standard is provided, then it's all translated to the ISO, and that's then pushed to a catalog function. And there's actually quite some work also on data standards. So that's ISO 28258. We have a Postgres database model on that. There's a GEO package on that, working on lab standards. So that's more on vocabs. And there's quite some guidance. So I won't go into detail on that, but just to mention that there is work on vocabularies, there's work on ontologies, and that does affect the metadata work. Next slide. I think I have a little bit of a delay in seeing the slides change, so I'm sorry if I say that too much. This is actually a proposal that is being designed by Solwise Project, which is European Horizon Europe project, together with the JRC, the Joint Research Center, where the JRC said, well, we really want to safeguard all knowledge and data of all these missions or projects because they're really afraid of it getting lost. So we need to make it findable, and therefore they propose to make a metadata template, how it's called there, with quite some lists. And there we really started from the core metadata standards that I mentioned before, where there's only very few that are mandatory. So that's the M. It's here in bold, and really a lot that are optional. And what you see is that there's, for example, some date of sampling. There's also here the coordinate reference system. And so quite a couple are, well, it might be nice to make them mandatory, but they're not. And there's a couple that are really soil specific, so soil properties, soil functions, soil threats, and that still needs to come with a code list, and those are still being designed. So we have a first list. I still want to put them to machine readable vocabularies. That's not yet done. I hope to do that in the next month or so. And then maybe we have this, well, kind of European soil metadata template. I should say that there's also, I'm not sure if that's on the slide if you press next, but there's also some other initiatives to make metadata templates. For example, for soil biology, they made a dedicated one also for long-term. Oh yeah, so I edited it too late. That's okay, you can leave this one. There's also a metadata profile for long-term field experiments that has been made in a dedicated way. Well, soil biology already mentioned. So there's also some really subdomain specific metadata templates or profiles. And in the vocabularies, well, I think it's a little bit of a mess at the moment. So there's laws coming out which provide certain definitions. So we're working to make those machine readable. ANSYS in Australia did a really nice job, I think, to digitize all the terms from their agreed upon standards, soil description standards, lab standards, etc., to make that into a nice vocab. But that's kind of the exception. So a lot of others, there's Inspire, and that has certain structure that also incorporates samples. But otherwise, it's mostly on the national level. Next slide. Maybe if there's too much background noise, let me know. Then I'll move maybe to a different room and at another conference. So this is just a little bit of an overview of some vocabularies that are used regularly. Like ANSYS is there, AgroVoc, GEMET, European one, GLOSYS, which is based on the FAO guidelines for soil description. And we're now compiling also a front end where we can actually look through soil vocabularies that are sourced then from all these different other repositories. And we just recently made a namespace also in W3ID, EU Soil Voc, so that should make it a bit easier to map everything. And in addition to that, there's actually quite a lot of glossaries in development by different projects. And we're now trying to make an effort to harmonize that a little bit and to encourage people to first, in their keywords selection in any metadata annotation, please first check the legislative terms, then the official standards, then the de facto standards, and then maybe a project, just to harmonize a little bit. Next slide. Yeah, so this is just a screen dump of the SOVOC, just as an example. That hopefully there it has the URIs and you can extend on it a little bit. Next slide. Or was that a click on the link maybe?
So they looks like you have to run and then the nerves are connected to the sides, not to go out.
Yeah.
Like you're right on top of there, so no. Yeah, and then the whole string is not like this.
Yes. This is just thanks to Megan Wong. She provided the slide where basically just the SOSA SSN schema for the sampling, and this is actually also at the core of, for example, the GLOSYS ontology and the ANSYS ontology. So, and there's some possibilities to improve on this in the future. So this is basically what a lot of the more common ontologies work from when it comes to sampling. Next slide. Where there's some examples of how that looks like, what it looked like at the moment, how that's encoded. Just as an example, basically, this is how it is in ANSYS. Next slide. I think that will be the last one. It's just to conclude a little bit that it is quite a scattered landscape. We have a lot of initiatives that are only loosely interconnected and that could have a bit more governance. There are SOL data standards. There's also implementations available, but the vocabularies, they are there to a large extent, but they're still very much in progress. And that goes to all aspects of the vocabulary development. So both on the governance and to the mapping, one set of vocabs to another. And also machine readability is very limited. So very often these are still web-based glossaries, and we're really trying to go through a process to make those machine readable. And for the metadata profile, there is one European one that is now being proposed. It's not specific to sampling. There are a couple of different options. It's scattered. It's a little bit siloed in their subdomain. The good thing is it's based on the common metadata standard, so that should make it reasonably well mappable to some of the work that we presented here before. But well, we didn't really take the physical samples metadata profile into account in the first place. So it would be good to map that and to understand how we can improve both on the soil side and if we can provide some use cases for the sample type. Those were my slides.
Yeah, thank you very much, Penny. Does anyone have any comments or questions of Penny? Someone's put in the chat for you, Penny, that there's a software for displaying technologies to check out OLS, the ontology lookup service. Okay, well, now we'll move on to the next session.
Thanks a lot.
I guess we don't really have time for any more, unless you'd just like to quickly call out if you've got a group similar to like what Kirsten and Fanny are talking about that are working on getting metadata schemas going for physical samples. Are there any other ones that we should know about? And I'm warning you, if you nominate it, we'll be asking you to present it at the next session, next plenary. Okay, well, let's go on to the next section, which just kind of wanted to have some open discussion about, what's the best way going forward with these activities in developing the metadata profiles for samples, because I think people have talked about ultimately we want to get together and do the cross-domain ones. So I'll just, next slide, please. I think the important thing that, I remember getting a bit crabby with Kirsten and Jens when they set up this group because I thought the title was too long, but it is important that the focus is on physical samples within the research ecosystem. And again, in our original case statement, which I think goes back to 2010, urgent need for integrating physical objects into the digital research ecosystem, both in global and interdisciplinary context to support search, retrieval, analysis, reuse, and scientific reproducibility. So again, I'm just sort of saying this interest group is fairly broad. I also thought it was interesting how both Kirsten and Fenny were showing the alignment of their work towards, like Fenny I know is with SOSA, and Kirsten was showing O&M. And then also there is the GBIF standard. And next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Just sort of saying, what are we going to do with these 53 entries in our catalogue? I think a couple more have sneaked in tonight. Next slide, please. And I wished I'd had Kirsten's slide, not this older one, because in Kirsten's slide, she showed that the descriptive metadata, they've now upgraded that to be consistent with the terms that are in standards like O&M and SOSA. So next slide. Yeah. And I come back to, again, we've got to get these into the digital ecosystems. And again, coming back to our catalogue, have metadata elements that are going beyond the actual sample descriptive one. And I guess what I'm arguing is whether we need to start, or I mean, Kirsten and Penny have already started doing it, aligning our vocabularies, metadata schemas more with things like iAdopt and the OGC specification. And I also agree with what Kirsten said, that we've had this problem in Australia where people have looked at how we're using IGSN in Australia, and we've been severely criticised for not using ORCIDs and RAWs more, not getting more of those PIDs into our metadata itself. But I would kind of counter that by arguing that some of our sample catalogues go back before ORCID and RAW were started and back to FAIR. But again, another thing is both SOSA and ISO, the observation measurements and sample standards, were upgraded within the last 2 years. So I think the next slide is just throwing it out for, again, this is the one Fenny showed, which is aligned with sensor observation, sample observation, sensor and actuator standard. And that's kind of what the soils people are working towards. Next slide. And I also think, again, Penny didn't talk about it, but Penny's she did mention she's connected to the International Union of Soil Science. I think there's also a need for us to start connecting to some of these science unions or these big global projects, because often when you get involved with these groups, you get the crossover between the scientists, the science unions, because as our vocabulary list shows, and as Fanny has shown, there's heaps of soil vocabs, there's heaps of ones for geoscience, but how do we start to converge? We'll never get it down to one. We're going to have a few, but have them so that they're compatible, but also more specifically make sure whatever we do is endorsed by the science unions or the associations, the experts in the domain itself. Next slide. How would you approach harmonising all these vocabs? We've got about 15 minutes left if we want to have an open discussion. It's 1:45 in the morning here and my voice is fading fast, so I'm going to have to hand it over to you guys. Or Jens or Kirsten, would you like to try and lead discussion, because I haven't got any voice left?
Wait, that's not good. Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's a humongous task in harmonizing vocabularies. It, I think from my perspective, the solution always comes down to mapping and having, one central vocabulary that is under the governance of somebody. It's kind of hard for samples because they are in so many domains, so it's not one scientific union unless CoData would offer their help here. But that we all just provide mappings to some jointly approved vocabulary or vocabularies that do not require any changes in local systems, which I don't think would be successful, but happy to hear from others. And I mean, I actually deleted a slide that I had at the end of my slide deck, which was about next steps and thinking about getting together in some sort of working group to solve this. I mean, we have discussions every half year or so in a plenary, but that doesn't help us make progress. And when Leslie and Jens and I forget who, there was a fourth person, when we started this interest group, we really wanted to advance the convergence across many domains, because we did have already efforts going on in the earth sciences, and that was that first slide I showed that was basically related to the IGSN metadata, which were geoscience focused at the time. Now we know much more, and we have much more, unfortunately, and I think we need to dive into some actual work and how that can be achieved. I would be really curious to hear from all of you how you would contribute, would be willing or able to contribute in any way on, making actual steps forward in. I mean, one big step was Leslie obviously setting up this big spreadsheet that we now know about all these activities that are going on around samples. But that makes it even more daunting to try and collaborate and try to converge. So, I mean, is it setting up another working group? Is that at all feasible? Is it a project that needs to be funded? Yes, Jens, I'm glad you're.
Not that I wanted to stop you. I just wanted to
My rambling.
wait. um, I, an important contributor to this group was Esther Plump, who contributed a fantastic use case that illustrates how disciplines can intersect. And today, I really like Catherine's presentation and the way you looked at the use cases of where were the commonalities, not so much on the object basis, but on the use. What is the community doing? What do they need to know about those objects? And maybe that is a feasible approach instead of an abstract general. We try to fit everything. That to look at where are the cases where we need to have those crossovers. So in Esther's archaeology case, we had different disciplines intersecting. In Joyce's soil archaeology geology use case, we had an intersection of disciplines. How do we enable those use cases with common metadata with common vocabularies. That might be a way forward instead of trying and boiling the ocean and solving everybody's problems at the same time. Wolf.
Yeah, maybe it goes a little bit in the same direction. I mean, rather than say having one ring to rule them all, I mean, it would be probably already helpful if you would identify, say, important vocabularies in different domains and say encouraging domains to come together for one vocabulary or for a set of vocabularies for their domains, so that instead of a plethora of lots of vocabularies, we would only deal with a handful of them, which would make things already much easier. And then trying to map on a case-by-case basis. So say try to map attributes and properties between some of those vocabularies where there is actually a use case to combine things.
And sorry, Manu, that I jump in here, but I'd like the hierarchy of vocabularies that Fanny had in her presentation of saying use the mandated ones first, then use I forgot the details, community agreed ones, and so on. So to have this hierarchy that guides the choices of which ones to choose.
Yeah. Emmanuel, I think, was next.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, a hierarchy helps. The problem with vocabularies typically is, in my experience, and that's how I felt a little bit about it, and we could see that here too, is that they are all very domain specific, and the use is very domain specific. So it is very hard to be solved by the data stewards and data managers themselves, because they would have to make domain decisions, which the domain scientists usually feel very strongly about. And that makes it very difficult to sort that out. What we within Helmholtz, we did a survey of vocabularies that we use within the marine domain, and what helped us was to count where and how often vocabularies were used, and we found out that there were actually very, very few vocabularies that were actually frequently used by across different systems, and we then started to prioritize those over the other, just to get a handle on where to start. And as I said, for the broader set of information, there usually is not that much, and also the categories or parameters where vocabularies are applied usually are very few. There's also just a handful that are really important. Many of them, they go into far more detail than is needed for the data systems. And I think it's important to make decisions on these things and not just treat all the vocabularies equal. They are not equal, definitely not. But it requires a decision, and to tell people go this way and not that. Yeah, you will lose some information, but you will be compatible with the rest of the world. And I think that's what we have to find out. Basically, that's why I like this catalog that Leslie compiled, is because it gives us a handle on what is in use. And if we all go and basically make a mark in which ones we use, well, I think we will very quickly have an idea of which ones are the more important ones.
Okay, thank you. We'll pass to Fanny, and I see your call. Thomas, you're trying to get your hand up. So can we do Fanny, and then we'll go to Thomas?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And actually, this is a question that is at the center of a lot of the work that we're doing. Because, well, the whole list of potential vocabularies that I showed, it's a mess. And a lot of soil scientists don't really know what to use. So they just start somewhere, and they often still make up keywords themselves. So one of the solutions that I was thinking of, but maybe I'd be really happy to hear some responses to if this makes sense, is to double post. So to when there is like a really main core vocabulary, for example, legislative terms, to make sure that those end up in all the main vocab repositories that people are using. So wherever their entry point is, if it's in Envo or in Agovoc or in something else, they will end up using the same terms that have the same UID or so that could be one. And another one is what I'm trying to push here in the European Commission on the mission soil is if we can get some domain specific expert groups together that would work on defining those glossaries. And then that's why I started with that hierarchy. If the Commission can put all the legislative terms in Eurovoc, for example, and if the soil biologists talk among themselves, what are the main terms? Do we actually agree? How different is your definition from mine? Those are endless discussions. It takes a lot of time. But if those are the people that actually know. So in Solwise as a project and also as ISRIC as an organization, and actually it goes through to IUSS and GSP and a lot of others, is how can we facilitate that technically? So as data people, we would know what a good vocab consists of. So if we provide that guidance and those templates, like what is an exact match, what is a broader term, a narrower term, etc. What do you need a source? What is your UID? Do you have a W3ID namespace? If we provide that base layer and then could organize subgroups where they can battle over definitions, that would help. And in those projects in Europe, you already have a lot of cross-domain stuff as well. And that's actually what I really like, the demand-based approach. So whenever there's a project that wants to publish their metadata, it might be on land use, it might be on soils, it might be on water, it might be on geology. There's in a project you have those cross sections, so that could be really nice, hopefully funded environments where people can work on. But it really helps to have less these tables, and it does need some push also by funders. So maybe if funders really make this a priority, that would really help to leverage some time from those domain specific groups. It's just some
Okay.
ideas.
Yeah, thanks very much, Penny. In the interest of time, we'll just pass to Thomas. I hope it's a quick question, and then we'll ask our dear co-chair. And if you have been following the notes, there's somebody been doing some excellent notes for us, and I think it's Esther. And so I really want to make sure I get a thank you into her for that, and whoever else has been doing it. Okay, Thomas, your question, please.
I pretty much wanted to say the same like Emmanuel. I think that this is, from my perspective, it's the way to go to identify the vocabularies we can refer to as and this could be the recommendation of this group here. For me, it follows up very nicely the discussion we had yesterday in our session, because what we were discussing with the universe of samples is to identify terms which can serve as entry points to these vocabularies to say, okay, this material, you should use this vocabulary. With the other material, you should use this vocabulary. So I see a nice synergy here, a potential one.
Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Esther now to take us through the last things. I don't think we'll have time to work out what the 3 key items are, but if you have an opinion on what you think the important things are, please put them in the notes. So over to you, Esther.
I actually did put in my 3 key takeaways, but I think I might need to reshare the screen for that. So they are already in the slides, but I don't see them in
you'd
the
have to
ones that I'm
refresh.
showing now.
Phew,
I'll
that's
move
done.
back and forth. Yeah, so I was indeed taking notes, but sometimes having to move forward the slides, etc., may have inhibited that. So if you want to just double check if what it is that you said is actually covered in the notes, that would be great. But I think to wrap up in 2 minutes, I think the 3 takeaways that I heard for today is that we already have a lot of efforts going on in this landscape. Because the topic is broad, there's lots of disciplines that are involved. And this results into, well, something that Fanny has also already highlighted. It's a very scattered landscape. And what we've seen today is also that it's very difficult to follow all of the activities and be aware of these existing efforts. And then the next step is that if we have these existing efforts, how do we collaborate between these? And how do we perhaps not go into a one ring that rules all, but how do they at least align? So how do we go there? Which leads me to my key takeaway 3, which has been mentioned, I think, only twice, but I do think it's a very important point to make progression. If we want people working on these types of efforts, it needs to be funded. So perhaps one of the things that working or interest group members can do is to reach out to funders and to highlight, well, if this is important to reach fair data, then this is some of the efforts that need to be included in projects, because otherwise it will be difficult to move forward. So these key takeaways are in the slides. There's no notes because for some reason I can't do talking and note taking. I'll work on that for the next plenary. So that leaves us to next steps. We have our next plenary rapidly coming up, and this will be an in-person plenary only from the 6th to the 8th of October in London, UK. And it will be helpful to identify who would be going. I am lined up to go, but I am not sure about all of our co-chairs or group members. And keeping this in mind, and Leslie already pushed you, we need presenters for these sessions. So if you have an idea that you would like to present, or if you perhaps know someone else that could present, please do reach out to us. And most importantly, please do join our interest group, but also existing efforts such as the metadata working group. I'm not sure if we can put in information in the chat for that.
Yeah, I should have also
maybe...
had a dot point, which was make sure you join this physical samples group. The links are in the notes.
And maybe another point is that we're always looking for more people to co-lead the group. So if you're interested in becoming a chair of this group, please also do reach out. It's not a lot of work, but yeah, it would be helpful to have even more people involved in leading the efforts of these groups. And with that, I think we're at the end of our session for today, and we're looking forward to hear more from you during our next plenary if you're available to, or if you can join us in London, and otherwise in the group. And I hope to at some point finally have my email set right, so I'm also involved in all of these communications.